It was claimed by certain types, the precursors of Reform UK amongst them, that Brexit was necessary for the UK to recover and preserve its sovereignty. Curious, because the very act of leaving the EU with the stroke of a pen emphatically proved our sovereignty. It proved it. Deciding to leave the EU was the act of a sovereign nation. So, the premise that we'd lost our sovereignty was false. Nevertheless, the Brexiters maintained that because we had to compromise our actions as a nation due to the terms of treaty obligations, that we had surrendered our sovereignty. But if this were the case, then all treaties with other countries amount to us surrendering our sovereignty. Being a member of NATO is a surrendering of sovereignty. It does oblige us to do things, to defend other NATO members if they're attacked, for instance. So, if sovereignty were an absolute, the Brexiters might be onto something. But that's the problem with their thesis, because sovereignty is not an absolute. We adopt certain obligations when we sign a treaty, but we sign because we also receive certain advantages. Same with trade deals. This has always been the case. This is what any deal between nations amounts to. Sovereign nations surrendering some aspects of their sovereign will in return for advantages. That's what all treaties, all trade deals are. That's what they're for. Sovereignty is, in effect, the currency by means of which nations buy good neighborliness of each other. Well, that's its lovely and fluffy aspect at least. It is also at the same time something else. Sovereignty is power. And in that regard, it can be brutal. Look at Ukraine. It is a nation that has been told by another nation which treaties it might be permitted to sign. It was told to not join the EU or NATO, and if it did, there'd be trouble. These diktats have been insisted on for decades, and then the nation issuing these prescriptions invaded anyway. The sovereignty of Ukraine has been fatally compromised. Russia is looking to make Ukraine a vassal state, if not simply to conquer it, with a sovereignty for Ukraine, if Russia is actually calling the shots. Or look at Greenland, a territory rather than a nation, but did you know that it chose to leave the EU in 1985 whilst Denmark, whose territory it is, remained in the EU? The US attempted an assault upon Danish sovereignty, saying it would simply take Greenland. Denmark, undeniably a small country, was able to push back because of its membership of both the EU and NATO. Its sovereignty was effectively enhanced by its membership of those two institutions. So the US could venture the notion of a little force, but its interrelationships made the cost of following through insupportable. It could have acted militarily. All Europe was aware that it had that power, but actually exercising that power would have isolated the US and forced new allegiances amongst its old allies from which America would then be excluded. Nevertheless, the US did leverage that European awareness of what it could do if pushed into an expression of its will in terms of an enhanced presence in the Arctic. Sovereignty can be about economic advantage, it can be about military force, but it is often about a dance between the two. And our political class, if it is at all worthy of holding power, ought not to be at all confused on that point. Indeed, it ought to be insisting we make every effort, take every opportunity to maximize our effective sovereignty. Looking rather like the inverse of Denmark, who have, I remind you, effectively enhanced their sovereignty through their membership of NATO and the EU, the UK's sovereignty has been diminished by Brexit because our clout, our power, has been diminished. Our trade with our biggest markets seriously impeded, and we're signing embarrassing deals such as that with Australia, which must be expected to eviscerate our agricultural sector. We do not have energy security or food security, and our aircraft carriers have been laid up with faults for years that are not entirely resolved even now. By all the measures of what makes for real-world sovereignty, be we talking trading power, security, or military power, we are deficient to a degree that we have not been for 500 years. Therefore, if British sovereignty is truly your concern, you must be in favour of rejoining the EU. Urgently.
What back, like